Well, and of course, one of the issues that has been talked about by a lot of Kenyans in the past few weeks is the issue of the housing fund levy that should be mandatory, according to a government gazette notice, that will be effected from the 9th of May this month. Of this month, rather. And that is the reason why we have Sam Orlando with me, who's a housing rights advocate. Thank you so much for having time to join us in studio, sir.
Thank you very much for having me this evening.
So let me ask you, do you think the priority for Kenyans right now, housing tops the list?
I think it does, and that's why it has been prioritized as one of the big four agenda by this administration. But whereas it's a priority, and whereas we acknowledge as a nation that the majority of our population are living in squalor or they lack decent housing, the approach towards giving this housing in this rapidly urbanizing nation is also something worth debating and worth talking about and worth interrogating as a people. So that whereas the government appreciates that it's a problem, they should also take into consideration the methodology that they are applying towards prioritizing housing as a need that they need to work on as a government.
What as a housing rights advocate, what is your take on the criteria that the government intends to use to have people, get those houses, the affordable houses?
I know there has been a lot of discussions regarding housing fund as a methodology in financing housing. But then other than that, within the housing fund framework, they are talking about a lottery. But then that aside, before we delve into that deeply, is that the government is saying that they are proposing a housing fund that will have a 1.5% tax on those who are in the formal economy, those who are employed. But then the question is, who is this who lacks housing? There are casual laborers who sometimes do not have formal contracts. They are the people in Njengo who sometimes do not have contracts with the contractors who have contracted them. They live on a daily wage. So then the question is that if your methodology is approaching housing from a formal perspective, how will this address those who are in the informal economy? Those whom you cannot attach the 1.5% deductions to. Those who do not, they are not even able to pay the pay as you earn. They are not able to pay NHIF. They are not able to pay NSSF. How will they benefit from this program? That's also one of the gray areas in the approach that has been taken by government.
So from where you sit, there are a lot of cases that have been filed in court, one by Cofek that stops the employers from effecting that. And the government also was dealt a blow in its plans to effect that. Just today, the World Bank approved a 25 billion shillings loan for that project. And it is going to help in the establishment and the operationalization of the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Corporation. Where do you see this going?
I think from my perspective is that there's absence of clarity on the direction that the government wants to take. Whereas they can seek grants and loans from development partners like banks, whereas they can access this from the taxpayers through the levy that has been proposed. There's no proper framework on the methodology of delivery or how people are going to benefit. You will appreciate that as a nation we've had housing cooperatives for a very long period of time, and particularly those who have had low incomes have been relying on housing cooperatives, have been relying on chamas to access housing. So what is the place of these initiatives that have been able to provide housing to Kenyans for a very long period of time, so that then we go to the refinancing company that the ministry is setting up? Then the question is, do we have the proper legislative framework to support this? The last time I checked, I remember the PS was before the Committee on Housing in the National Assembly, and they didn't agree on how this housing fund was to be administered, including the setting up of this cooperation, refinancing the cooperation that they were setting under the housing fund regulations. But now the question is, will someone from Kibra be able to access this loan that World Bank is putting into this company? You know, will he have the clout to even be able to service this loan in the event they are able to access? But, you know, we've had, you know, workable solutions. We know that as a nation, we've had housing cooperatives that have provided housing for low-income earners. Then the second question is that whereas the government is looking at levying, you know, tax to those people in the formal economy to also be in a source of finance for those who are to bring to this pool of providing affordable housing. The question is, if you are a teacher back in the village, let's say you are coming from Samburu, then you took a loan from Equity Bank and constructed your house. Then now also through regulations, you are being told by government that, you know, whereas you have got your house already, we are going to deduct again 1.5% from your salary, you know, because it's mandatory for everyone who's in the formal economy. So then, what is the methodology? What is the philosophy behind this?
Well, while we're still on that question of whether or not this is going to be fair for some people, this refinancing corporation that the ministry, the treasury is trying to create, and you know, the percentage that is going to be held by the private sector is going to be about 80%, and the government will own the rest of the 20%. While we're on that issue of fairness, how is this going to be achieved? How is the private sector going to, you know, manage the 80%? I mean, who is being, you know, looked at when you talk about the formation of this refinancing corporation?
First is that the private sector is being given an upper hand to access 80% of the 25 billion that has been placed by World Bank and also other sources of resource by government. Then the question is, what's the place of those people who cannot form companies? What's the place of housing cooperatives that have been able to pool resources in the informal sector? What's the place of chamas in accessing this fund to assist in provision of housing? You notice that the private sector is driven by profit, which is not bad. But then for a long period of time, you also notice that housing is very expensive. For instance, if you have to take a mortgage, I know you are employed, if you take a mortgage, it will take you over 20 years to repay it in Kenya now. So then, if we, in the event we open the space for the private sector, will the government have an opportunity to regulate the amount of interest that they accrue from investing in this, and also from leveraging on the resources from the refinancing company? Because the question is that, you know, you have allowed the private sector to dip their hands into this jar, and they are constructing houses. Then they tell you that a house will go for 3 million. How long will it take for someone from Kibra to be able to repay this loan? Because that's the question. Whereas we know that in housing cooperatives, they can do houses incrementally. And, you know, a house that would go for 3 million, they may do it maybe for 1 million or 800,000, and it will be easier for them to access housing. Then, secondly, is the problem we are solving a money problem, or is also a problem with how the city is networked? For instance, if you take someone from Kibra to Machakos, where you will get this land where this private company will put the housing, the person in Kibra depends on industrial area. Yeah. That's where they go daily to work. So then he's got a house in Machakos County, because that's where we've got vast pieces of land. How will they be able to come to industrial area? Will they have an extra cost on transportation, so that then we keep them out of the city? Yeah. So then what we'll be perpetuating will be a market-driven evictions, where now we are taking people from the city where they earn their livelihoods, and that pulls them, and we're taking them outside with the guise of providing housing.
Okay.
And that's, I think, also a limitation on how this is being approached. Housing cannot be looked at from, just a singular approach. It's an integrated system where that when you have a housing, then other services like education, other services like sources of livelihoods, other services like health services must be integrated, so that then the common man who is already vulnerable is cushioned. Because what drives people into informal settlements? Because they cannot keep paying, the high costs of fees, their sources of livelihoods where they get decent jobs, no access to healthcare.
Yeah, true.
If we had, free education, if we had free access to healthcare, if with our sources of livelihoods, okay, then I think everyone will be living in a very decent house in Nairobi, from my perspective.
So you're saying this was not well thought out?
So it was not well thought out, and we still look at it as brick and mortar, as a house.
Okay.
For instance, if you are able to come from Mombasa to Nairobi in 1 hour through the train, and your real home is in Mombasa, I'm very sure you will, choose to stay in Mombasa rather than stay in an informal settlement provided that you've got access to a source of livelihood and you live in a decent area. So I think the approach should also take an integrated direction other than just this singular direction that it's taking.
Well, so let me ask you, the Central Organization of Trade Unions and its Secretary General, that's Francis Atwoli, was once opposed to this whole idea, but they made a hasty retreat, and now they are in support of the Housing Fund levy, but with some conditions. The employers' giant body, that's the Federation of Kenya Employers, is still opposed to this. Who's telling Kenyans the honest truth? Who's honest with Kenyans?
I think when I listened to the Secretary General today of Cotu, he was saying that this should be subject to 15% pay increase.
Is it realistic? Let's start from there.
It may not be very realistic because at first, who do Cotu represent? Which sector of the economy? Is it those who are casual laborers? Is it those who are in permanent employment?
Or those in the public service?
Or those in the public service. And they also need to acknowledge that it's not only their population or the population of Cotu that's going to benefit from this. They are supporting the 1.5%, but they have not negotiated the 15% pay increase. And FKE, I think, has been very clear that they're not going to effect the 15%. So then, again, from their perspective, they feel that it's a right to go ahead and deduct the 1.5%. So if the minimum wage is 12,000, I think, so 1.5% of that is how much? And how long will it take someone who is the estimated average age of Kenyans, I think is 35 to 40, if I'm not wrong. How long will it take someone who is 35 years old to be able to own a bed sitter that I think goes for 600 to 800,000 in this program? So I think they're also not being very honest to their members that the approach that is being taken by government is not practical. That's Cotu. And after contributing this 1.5% again, you go to a lottery where it's not that it's based on what you have contributed, but there will be a lottery where you can pick a no or a yes. So if you pick a no, what happens to you? These discussions. Does this guarantee someone housing? So I think from my perspective, it's not a very well thought out approach, but we appreciate that the government acknowledges that there's a housing problem, but the approach is different. Secondly,
what will be an alternative, maybe best way of doing things?
The alternative from my perspective is that Kenya has evidenced that people are able to pull together resources, even the low income earners. And we've noticed this through housing cooperatives. We've noticed this through chamas.
And saccos, which
are doing very well. And you notice that the interest rates in these saccos are normally 1.something%. So then the question is, if you were to take this 25 billion from World Bank into the housing cooperatives, into the saccos and into the chamas, will it expand their capital base so that it allows members to benefit from what they are doing? I know you know the story of what happened, you know the story of what happened to the boda riders in Laikipia County, if I'm not wrong, where they were contributing 50 shillings a day. and they now own houses. You know stories of what Nacho has been able to do with houses. We know communities that are using alternative building blocks to, make access to housing cheaper. So then the question is the approach. Why are we very keen in inviting the private sector, and who are the shareholders in this private sector? Will we find someone from Madare? Will we find someone from Kibra as a shareholder in this private sector? Or for you to qualify for this, you must have a particular capital base that may disenfranchise the 60% who are majority of Kenyans who come from the informal settlements.
Okay.
Yeah, so from my perspective, if I were government, then I'll increase the capital base of housing cooperatives, of saccos, of chamas, and try to legislate around it to open the floodgates and also remove the bottlenecks. Then secondly, what makes housing more expensive? If today you want to build a house in Nairobi, you want to go through the approval process of the county government.
Yeah.
You will notice that you will spend close to 200,000 before you start construction. These bottlenecks, these are things, that are policy issues that the government can do away with. For instance, they can allow and make these services free. So that the approval processes are free for circles, are free for individuals who are providing houses for low-income earners, and shorter, so that then people generate interest and they construct housing. But as much as as much as we continue to place these bottlenecks where it wants to take 1 year to get a structural engineer from the county government, and then National Construction Authority is on your neck. Then before you are done, the city council askaris are on your neck. Then it becomes crazy. Then the water company is on your neck. NEMA is on your neck. It becomes very expensive to construct a house, and it locks majority of Kenyans out.
Well, thank you very much, Sam Orlando. Sam Orlando is a housing rights expert, having a great conversation there about a subject that is really quite controversial there. I must say, a lot of Kenyans talking about it. That is the 1.5% of their wages, or salaries rather, being deducted to fund one of the Jubilee's big four agendas, and that is the affordable housing. We now take a very short break. When we come back, more stories that made headlines today.